everyone, and welcome to our latest Madison Alley Fireside Chat. Where attendees are just rolling in right now, so we'll wait just a moment. But in the meantime, we hope that everyone's staying safe and well during this time of crisis. As you know, we have an hour set aside here, and we're excited about this particular session that we'll get started in just a moment. We had over 200 people that registered for this event, and already it looks like there's about 50 people that have already joined in. It'll take just a moment for everybody to come in, and I'm sure we'll probably get over 100 people or so. So now I can see people rolling in, and we'll get started. So I'm delighted to have here three very special distinguished guests as we talk about strategic opportunities in marketing, data, and analytics. So we have Jonah Goodhart, Alex Langshur, and Amy Buckner Chowdhry. And we'll get started here right now. So on this first slide, if we could just take a moment and we'll introduce our three guest distinguished panelists here. So certainly delighted to have, what's also, I think, interesting about these guests is that, they present different perspectives. So Jonah, who's co-founded and was former CEO of MOAT, can talk about his story as he built one of the leading marketing data analytics platforms that was ultimately acquired in a very successful exit to Oracle for $850 million. MOAT provides real-time multi-platform and actionable marketing analytics across all platforms, across desktop, mobile, video, and other forms of content, measuring viewability, non-human traffic detection, audience and attention, and is a full-service reporting platform. So Jonah, thanks very much for joining us. We also have Amy Buckner Chowdhry, who is building the largest independent UX research insight consultancy that's helped some of the most innovative brands in the world. And some of their clients include Facebook and Google, Amazon, FedEx, Walmart, and American Express. And uniquely, their qualitative insights in terms of UX and research insights have been helping the digital product design of many of these innovative brands and global companies. So Amy, thanks for joining us today. And finally, we have Alex Langshur, who is the founder and the co-CEO of Cardinal Path. Cardinal Path is one of the leading marketing and data analytics consultancies and works for many of the large global enterprise brands. And they help marketers win by creating business value from data. Cardinal Path is, in fact, or has been a client of Madison Alley. And we're working with Alex and his team as they were ultimately acquired by Dentsu Aegis Network. So Alex, thanks also for joining us today. So with that, we'll go to the next slide here. So just a quick overview about Madison Alley. As many of you know, we're a strategic M&A and capital advisory group. We're specifically focused and always have been on digital marketing, media and advertising, technology, data, and services. We're arguably the first advisor in this sector exclusively focused, so it's been about 17 years since 2003. We're based in New York City and also have a significant presence in Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, as well as San Diego. Most of our clients in North America. We also have some in Western Europe and elsewhere in the world. We're typically capital raising between $10 to $100 million, and with M&A transactions between $25 and $250 million. And our focus is exclusively in this space. A lot of our specialty is, in fact, in marketing and data analytics. So we're certainly pleased to have such a distinguished panel here and an audience to talk about data marketing and analytics today. So with that, let's get started with the agenda to give everyone an overview. So we will begin from a CMO's perspective and talk about how can marketers benefit from analytics and consumer insights? We'll then shift from the consumer's perspective and take a look at and discuss what are the incentives for consumers to share profile and behavior data and qualitative data. We'll address privacy, attribution, marketing analytics attribution, and how the data and analytics can be useful. the qualitative data and the role of value of measuring that for consumer insights, identity resolution, other types of personal insights and behavioral data that can be relationship data in terms of sentiment and interests. We also have a slide that will talk about the actual strategic and M&A capital transactions that have been recent and notable, particularly in the last year, from some of the multi-billion-dollar deals to others across the spectrum of marketing data and analytics recently. And then finally, we'll have the benefit of the panelists to talk about leadership in a crisis and some of the strategies that they've used to pivot their own business in this time of crisis, or the new market realities, and advice that they may have for our audience of leaders here in marketing data, marketing and advertising services and technology. So with that, let's begin with the panel discussion. And thanks again for joining us. So let's begin with from a CMO's perspective. What is it, and what are some ways that marketers can in fact benefit from marketing data and analytics? And what's the value that what are they trying to achieve, and what's the value that they can realize? Jonah, perhaps if you'd like to begin.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Actually, I skipped one thing. So what I was hoping to do actually was first allow the panelists to introduce themselves. So let's begin with that. I think that would be very helpful context so that the audience gets a much better sense of who we have here as our distinguished panelists, and then we will jump into the CMOs themselves and the perspective. So Jonah, if you could please begin by introducing yourself.
Sounds good. Thanks, Michael, and thank you for having me. My name is Jonah Goodhart. As you said, I was the CEO and co-founder of MOAT. I spent the last 10 years or so focused on building MOAT, and I think from my perspective, trying to understand how human attention works in a world that's increasingly digital. Our specific focus was on building analytics and measurement around brand advertising. The company, as you mentioned, was acquired actually 3 years ago this month by Oracle, where the company continues to grow and operate. I guess I would just point out that when my brother and I started MOAT around 2010, there was something like 26 billion spent annually on internet advertising in the US. Last year, some 100 billion plus was spent on internet advertising in the US alone, about double that worldwide. In 2010, there were about 2 billion global internet users. Today, 4.5 billion and rising. So high-level trends are incredibly strong for this category, for this industry. And I think the question is, how do we best adapt to the changing environment, and how do we take advantage of new opportunities?
Okay, that's great. That's very helpful. So we'll definitely circle back to some of those questions that you just addressed there. Amy, would you like to go next and introduce yourself, please, and AnswerLab?
Sure. I'm the founder and CEO of AnswerLab. I started AnswerLab about 15 years ago. Since then, we've grown to about 140 employees all across the US and in India as well. As you mentioned before, we're a user experience insights company. So what that means is that we basically partner with brands as they go through their product design process or their experience design process, making sure that they bring humans into every stage that they go through, so that they're making decisions along the way that really result in the best possible experience that delivers on their KPIs and that the goals that they had for the experience. We're very fortunate this year that the whole world is going digital, that digital channels are becoming even more important to every brand we have as a client. And so we're continuing to grow as a business. We have more open positions. Our revenue is up about 30% so far this year. And it's really a testimony to the fact that we really cannot get along right now working from our homes without access to these digital channels. We also, as a business, had to make some pretty fast pivots back in March, and I look forward to sharing that with everyone a little later in the conversation today.
Yeah, that would be fantastic, and particularly given the innovative nature of some of your brands, a lot of the Silicon Valley companies, and Google, Facebook, and Amazon, and others. You certainly have a lot of insight from even the heart of where a lot of innovation is happening, and the most kind of digital epicenter of the economy. So it'd be great to hear a lot of those insights. So thanks very much. So Alex, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Cardinal Path and as it is now part of Dentsu Aegis Network.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michael. And thank you for inviting me to be part of the panel. So I'm a co-founder of Cardinal Path with four of my colleagues and co-CEO currently right now. And like Jonah, spent the better part of 10 years building that company to its current level. We are located throughout North America and in Europe, and expanding our operations as well beyond that. So, our basic tenet has always been, once anybody engages with any organization across one of these devices, there's a data flow, and our focus has always been to really instrument that data flow between the organization and its consumers, and to ensure that that instrumentation is done comprehensively, robustly, and accurately, and then to be able to surface what the insights that are being able to drawn from that data flow and create value from it. Our primary focus has been on deploying MarTech stacks, and we're the world's largest reseller of Google Analytics 360, and very focused in on the Google marketing platform. So, we're entering into a two-stack world really, and our focus has really been about how do we deploy those stacks in a way that gives marketers a competitive advantage. And so that's pretty much our focus.
Great, excellent. Okay, that's all great. So with that, let's begin with the first question, and from a CMO's perspective, or from a marketer or executive marketer's perspective, what is the value for data and marketing in how can CMOs and other marketing executives take advantage of data analytics and consumer insights that are available? Jonah, if you could perhaps
Sure. Yeah, I mean, so first of all, at a high level, marketing, I think, like a lot of things, is storytelling, quite simply. I think the question that we ask is, how effectively did I tell my story, and how successful was I at it in driving some desired action? Analytics and insights around trends help me focus my efforts, but you have to ask the right questions, and you have to make sure that you're using the right metrics to judge success. As an example, I think digital inventory, obviously, and digital usage spiked with the virus and the stay-at-home efforts, and we've seen a lot of changes on that front. But not every company was able to take advantage of that. Not every company was positively impacted by that. Some companies benefited on the face of things, but had to adapt. Zoom, which we're using as an example, I think is a great example. I saw the CEO of Zoom in an interview recently, and he said he built Zoom for enterprise customers with IT departments. And in the span of a couple of weeks, his primary user, one of them, became 2-year-olds doing preschool with their entire class. So I don't think he could have anticipated, or they could have anticipated that use case, but identifying a trend, identifying something has changed, and then adapting to that change is, I think, key to success. One other quick example I saw recently was Hershey's. Some of the Hershey's products obviously have been impacted by people not being able to go out to stores, et cetera. They came out with a new campaign around mask breath. So I guess if you wear a mask, you may develop breath impacted as a result of that. And so for one of their mint products, they came out with this new campaign to help people solve mask breath. And so I think part of the challenge for a brand or a CMO is trying to figure out, all right, what's changed? What do I do as a result of it? And how do I measure whether I'm doing the right thing? In the end of the day, I think it still comes back to trust for a brand and figuring out what's appropriate for me to do, and what should I do? How do I first and foremost make sure that my employees and team and community are safe? But then secondly, how should I act as a brand, and what would make sense for me, for our company as a brand? And so I think there's a lot of opportunity given that, but I also think people need to be thoughtful about how they go about it, given particularly that this particular sort of massive change in trend came with a lot of negative impact, along with death and despair, et cetera.
So we'll touch upon the issues with regards to COVID and what can be learned from marketing data and analytics. But Jonah, could you for a moment maybe talk about MOAT as it was developed and as it exists now, and how it provided marketers with how it provided marketers with a view of data and analytics, that how it distinguished itself in providing data and analytics in a different way than maybe other platforms were able to provide. And
sure.
then how that has been helping marketers.
Sure. I mean, at MOAT, I think we wanted to ask a very simple question, which is when you storytell as a brand in digital, if you go back to around 20 years ago or so, most of digital advertising was, at least the successful advertising, was direct response. It was driving some hard action. Brands had not, when I got online in the mid to late 90s, figured out how to storytell. How do you have Coke is happiness or open up happiness in a digital banner ad that's tiny on the top of somebody's screen? And it took a while to try to figure out, well, you can actually storytell and need to storytell in this medium. We began asking the question, all right, well, if that's the case, how do you judge success? And one of the areas that we sort of happened upon in that process was viewability. And the even more basic question of, before you can judge success of a brand ad, before you can judge whether somebody paid attention, you need to know that the ad was actually there and that somebody saw it or had a chance to see it. And so this sort of core question became a really important part of the cycle. Strictly from an analytics perspective, it was, look, you're spending 25 billion plus in the US alone, and that's going up 15% year on year every year. You're spending a heck of a lot of money. You should at the very least know that someone can see your ad and that it was a human being and not a bot or a computer. But secondly, let's start to ask questions about whether people were paying attention or not, and what we can understand in terms of driving outcomes. And that really led to a lot of the work that we did. I think as part of Oracle, and I left the company in last November after spending, I guess, 2.5 years there. But as part of Oracle, really what we were driving towards was figuring out, all right, well, a marketer has a lot of different tools in their toolkit to try to ask and hopefully answer some of these questions. And through the lens of advertising analytics or brand analytics, can we help solve one aspect of that? I think like all of these types of solutions, it's early days, and I think we're still learning a lot. But I just saw that the MOAT team announced a new product called MOAT Reach, where they're basically trying to bring TV data and digital data together for the first time, so that you can ask net new questions about how many unique people did I reach. Some of these things sound really basic, but limitations in our ecosystem have caused these things to not be easy to get answers to.
Yeah, that's great. That's very helpful. So, and Alex and Amy, do you want to comment on how you believe that marketers can benefit from market analytics, and if you'd like to touch into in a COVID environment that where there's so much uncertainty and so much variability in terms of consumer behaviors that's evolving, how marketers can benefit today from marketing, from data and analytics.
Amy, or?
Sure, go ahead.
Well, I think it's really interesting because I don't think there's any doubt, and I think that it's, marketers are sold on the requirement to have really good data analytics. So I think that part of the question is clear. The challenge is how is that data really surfaced and used? And, those challenges have been really highlighted by a number of things, not the least of which has been CCPA. But if we kind of go into it, one of the holy grails has been this idea about omni-channel experience and trying to organize and create the systems within the organization to make sure that wherever that consumer is engaging, it doesn't really matter, right? I'm able to pull together all those different elements and data, regardless of whatever channel the users experience us in the organization through. And the interesting thing about it is that, of course, we've all been trying to solve for how does online impact in-store, what's that relationship, and pull those two things together. And COVID's done this crazy thing of, it's kind of made the in-store experience almost irrelevant for a large number of brands, right? So in a sense, we feel very strongly that the best time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining and there's no rain going on. Right now, there's no rain going on. So I think this is a really unique time. If we think about what marketers can be doing is saying, well, look, I know this channel has essentially gone dark for me. I know I have to focus on these other channels, but this is an ideal time to put in the infrastructure, not just from a technical perspective, which is a challenge in and of itself, but also from an organizational perspective, because, we go into a lot of clients and we still see that the way that they're organized is almost by channel, which, the consumer doesn't really care about, and which creates its own, challenges related to data flow and creates its own challenges related to P&Ls and everything else. Well, we now have this unique experience that's going on at scale, where one of these channels is essentially going dark for us. So we can rely on these other ones, really understand how those are delivering for us. And if all the investments that we made against that one channel, the online channel, is paying off. And now kind of go back and do the connections in a more robust way from an infrastructure as well as from a data flow and data management perspective. So, we really think this is a unique opportunity that CMOs can benefit from.
Yeah. Okay, that's great. So with that, let's shift to the consumer's perspective, and Amy, perhaps you can begin. And with that, I think there's a couple different components, but you have a particularly unique perspective because as part of the research, you're gathering insights that really inform the digital product design and other decisions that are being made by your clients. So if you could touch upon what's the incentive for consumers to participate in research panels and other data that they may be providing, what's in it for them?
Sure, I'll answer that, and I have a few thoughts on that last question that I'll address as well, which is there is no more important time probably in the history of marketing and in research for clients to understand what their customers need. People are experiencing unprecedented economic uncertainty, fear, anxiety. They're worried about their health. And now is the moment for a brand to truly understand and have empathy for what their customers' experience is in that, and then to be able to design an experience that supports it and helps people. So what we've seen with our clients is that they're falling into kind of these three camps where one group really get it and they understand they need to double down on getting as many insights as possible and try to figure out how to support people. Another group says, I'm afraid, I don't know how to do research right now, so I'm just going to not do anything and hope this all blows over, just like we just hope the economy is going to suddenly bounce back in a couple of weeks. And then a third group that says, I just wasn't really using so much research before, so I'm just going to turn it off now. But the problem is that when you start launching your digital experiences without having this insight, you're either building the wrong thing or you're building a thing that is built incorrectly and only adds to people's suffering, honestly. So it's more important than ever to be able to tie this kind of research into the design of your digital experiences. And what we've found in our research is that people want to engage in that. I think some clients have been worried that is now the time to talk to a customer. But what we found is that customers want to tell their stories. And if you have a really great research experience, that's all of our work is qualitative and one-on-one interviews. If you have a great experience where the researcher can really provide space for the human to be able to be themselves and tell their stories, then you get unprecedented insight into what their experience is. So I think customers right now are really engaged. They're incentivized because in the kind of work they do, we offer an incentive. A person sits in a session with us and they can get like $100 or $125. And so it's really helping when the economy is down and people are struggling. And they want their stories to be heard. So now's not the time to be afraid to engage.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's great. Yeah, so we'll even circle back and talk about the qualitative research and measurement and data that you're providing to marketers as we move through this. So thanks. That's great. So let's touch upon obviously a hot topic nowadays is privacy, and privacy is certainly evolving now and becoming very relevant in a COVID pandemic era in terms of what privacy consumers are willing to share. But with that, could you touch upon in this era of GDPR and CCPA and other data privacy issues, how is it that marketers can still capture and collect the right data that they want to make meaningful decisions, but yet be compliant and be compliant as they need to be? So anyone want to begin with that? Jonah, perhaps you want to start with that in terms of privacy issues?
Sure, happy to. Yeah, I guess what I would say, and Alex may have some thoughts on this as well, but I think privacy was an ongoing discussion going into the pandemic. We were talking about the death of third-party cookies. The New York Times, you may have seen, just announced that they're removing all third-party cookie targeting on their site. They're only going to do first-party targeting, which means only when they have a direct relationship with the person will they use that data and only that data to target people. We've seen the rise of so-called consent-based permission, and that's the GDPR and CCPA at some level, and this idea of quote unquote, do not sell my data, and the concept, I guess, as a consumer that it is in fact your data. I think enter COVID-19 and the need for tracking and tracing, and all of the sudden, something that I think most of us would have said when hell freezes over, Google and Apple have partnered to combine and build a tracking system together that not only are we not worried about, we're encouraging because it's probably the right solution and will probably be really helpful. I don't think anybody in the privacy world would have guessed that they could pull that off a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago, but it might be the right solution for what we need. What I would say is, I think there's historically been a trade imbalance, if you will, with privacy, meaning that the consumer gives a lot of data and it's not always clear what they get back in return. I don't personally believe that so-called more relevant ads is always a great trade. Certainly when it serves our needs as a consumer, better recommendations on Amazon, okay, we're okay with that maybe. Better recommendations on Netflix, okay. I can understand it and I can understand what data you're using. Transacting with a credit card somewhere and having that data sold and attached to my digital profile and then used to target me starts to get into this strange world. And so I guess my view on privacy is that this is a super challenging area. And, you know, one of the things I always heard people say when I started thinking and talking about privacy was, well, you know, I don't really care. I don't, you know, millennials don't care. Young people don't care. I have nothing to hide. And so what do I care if somebody sees this stuff? And I've always had an issue with that perspective because I don't think you care until you're a target. And the minute you're a target for something, particularly if you have not done nothing wrong, as an example, then it changes. I read the article, as many of us did, that local police were requesting addresses of people who were tested positive for COVID. All of a sudden, this becomes very real when your private information, or maybe your assumption of what's private information is shared, and what people do with it changes at that point. So I think this is an extremely complex subject. I think there's a give and take. I think there's some good uses of trading information. We're willing to give up our privacy for TSA. We're willing to give up our privacy perhaps to Google and Apple so that we can go out into the world more safely. But I think we need to make privacy much more of a front and center discussion because I think there are real issues at stake for our society.
Yeah, it's great. That's great.
I echo a lot of your sentiments, Jonah. I mean, I've been focused on privacy for some time right now, and you know, counseling clients about it because you know there are teeth to the legislation that's out there, and they bite pretty hard if they bite and when they bite. So, you know, I think that what we've seen prior to this is a little bit of a laissez-faire attitude towards the collection of data, and the more the better. And right now, certainly in Europe, there's a shift in that mindset amongst the population, and we haven't really seen it in the U.S. But I'm waiting for that moment. I mean, because we've had data breaches, right? And people have been notified about that. And even after the data breaches, you'd still go on and you'd still see, you know, incredible amounts of requests for data from organizations. But I think COVID-19 and some event is going to be the tipping point where people kind of become that moment where they say, no, I'm really interested and I'm going to lean forward. You know, here's the key things, right? If we just look at the parameters and the guidelines, because they kind of dictate the direction, right? So the parameters and guidelines is there's legislative imperative. We're not going to get around that. That's going to come, and that's here. Then there's the fact that we are losing third-party cookies. So all the easy stuff is now going to be gone. And what that simply means is that identity and identity resolution is going to become super duper important. Number one. Number two, it means that the collection and management of first-party data by organizations is going to become mission critical. So even though I can go and buy third-party data that's whitelisted and it's all good, I still need to have that nucleus of my first-party data that I can create my audiences, which I can then use to create, you know, larger audiences if I buy other data sets. So organizations have to be able to, going back to something that Amy said, have conversations which are in the user's interest, in which there's a value exchange that's occurring in exchange for that data, right? So I will give you something of value. And that doesn't necessarily need to mean money, right? I mean, we kind of default right away to a discount. There's all kinds of ways you have a client that provides early access to their products, to their fan base, right? Early access, I want that, I'm willing to trade over data for that. So, but the key thing is the collection and management of first-party data. And I'm not going to get into the consent management tools around that. I mean, those are well established that are out there, but bottom line is you need to have one, period. Secondly, we're seeing the rise of CDPs, our customer data platforms, and to manage that first party data and the consent that's attached to it. I think we're going to see that the investments in DMPs or data management platforms is going to be, stranded investments because they're so dependent on third party data sources. But organizations are going to have to think through the experience that they're creating very, very carefully. They're going to have an app strategy. Absolutely, because that's a key way that you're going to be able to connect with people on mobile devices. And then they're going to have a data strategy, absent their first party data strategy, a data strategy writ large in order for them to be able to ingest and manage that in a secure fashion and ensure that it's attached to all the other attributes that they might have about an individual, and then be able to do some really deep analysis on those to create audiences, right? Because at the end of the day, what we're really trying to do with our MarTech stacks is to develop and define and identify audiences at scale for which we can develop experiences to match those audiences. We can then export those using identity resolution and identity providers to be able to find the people that we don't know that look like the people that we really know, and then to market to those individuals in an efficient and effective way. So, reach and frequency, I don't care about, mass market, don't care about that. It's about, can I, through my MarTech stack, identify, 200 audiences based on these various attributes. And they may be, these mega niches, and then activate my media to target those individuals and then measure that very carefully. And if you start to look down the road of this, what we begin to see is that we really are entering a very much of a walled garden phase, right? Where addressable markets, the ability for me to take my first party data, enhance it with some third party vendor of data, and there's a number of them out there, Merkle being one of them, to identify a larger audience that I can then activate through various channels and reach those people specifically and directly. So I think the flip side of that is we're going to see the monetization of a lot of companies' data sets too. So you can think of any organization that has a large consumer base, that through, again, that value exchange, in exchange for you giving me that, I will give you this. Now it says, well, I in fact have my own addressable market, and I'll let you buy to these people because, let's take CVS or Walgreens or whoever, I know exactly what they're buying, and we've got this relationship that I've established, and I put the parameters on that very clearly. And that's a valuable audience for certain people. So it all comes back to, first and foremost, and COVID, I think, again, really pushes us and gives us a little bit of a window where we can really push that first party data strategy. And the ones that are further along are the ones that are going to win, because of course we know that cookies are gone on Chrome within 2 years. So we're trying to conserve cash. A lot of clients are trying to conserve cash. A lot of marketers are worried about spend. Well, you've got a less than 2 year window when your third party cookies are gone. So those investments have to happen right now. And the good news about it is that the cost to deploy those systems used to be really Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 level of spend before you could really invest in that. Those tools have become rapidly democratized.
Yeah.
And so really the delta is not about how much you can spend to deploy those tools, it's how agile your organization is to be able to leverage those tools and leverage those flows. And you know what? that's the harder one because, buying technology, it's fairly simple. Changing how the chemical bonds within an organization, how P&Ls are structured, that's hard. That's a lot harder.
Right. That's really interesting. So the organizational strategy in and around setting yourself up for data ingestion, and even providing meaningful value to customers so that you have a value that you're offering to them to then capture more data and insights that's meaningful. And so that will begin to be developed. It sounds like, that data strategy.
Yeah, and I mean, let's just take a real use case, right? So, online, I give this information.
Right.
All right. So, the customer expectation is, if I gave you this rights here, then all your other channels need to be consistent, right, with that experience. If you gave you this on the web, then it's got to be on my app, it's got to be on my in-store experience, it's got to be everywhere, right? You can't transgress it. And so that's where I say, these channels become very difficult to break through.
Yeah, so let's actually take that segue into and talk about attribution. So is it possible, or to what extent is it possible to measure the customer journey across all so many different touch points now, social media, the web, online, offline, retail, and all those. And so is it possible to map out that customer journey and how meaningful that is? And then second, can marketers make decisions? Is there meaningful data that can be absorbed through the different touch points that can make decisions in terms of attribution and ROI decisions and intelligence, given that there's so many different touch points of data that's coming in? Would anyone want to talk about attribution? Do you want to begin, Alex, and begin about attribution?
Well, that was a big question. So I'll speak about one area that I feel particularly comfortable about, and that's attribution, right? So, it's been this holy grail that everybody's been pushing towards, right? And, the bottom line is that, I think it's kind of a fool's errand, honestly.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about attribution within one of these walled gardens all day, every day, right? That's what's going to happen. I mean, if you think about an entity like Google that knows where you're on Chrome and knows what your location signals, and has your intent signals, and has your voice signal. I mean, there's the ability, if I spend across that platform, I think they're going to give us full visibility into that platform. And, so just full disclosure, we're very big into the Google marketing platform, because we just see that garden is very robust in its ability to provide attribution. The challenge becomes when you try and go outside of those walled gardens, right? Then you're stitching things together. So, the idea of, I'll take an ad here, and I'll take an ad there, and I'll take an ad here, and I'll buy these different media and channels, and be able to pull that all together into attribution, a unified perspective. I see the technological hurdles against that, just the privacy hurdles against that, as being almost insurmountable. But within any walled garden, I think we'll be able to do that.
Mm-hmm. Jonah, do you want to touch upon that, given that MOAT is...
Sure. Yeah, and Amy, if you want to jump in too, I want to bring you into the discussion here, if you have any thoughts on this one.
Oh, sure. Thank you.
Go for it.
So I think we work in a world that's very different from this. When we think about looking at the cross-channel experience, we're watching people in their natural environments going through a cross-channel experience, and then understanding how the brand is able to connect all of those together. And so that's particularly important right now as we think about COVID. We're trying to help brands understand, how do they message about their COVID updates across both their home pages and their mobile site and their emails. Are those stories connected together? Is it what people are looking to see? Are they, for example, if they're a major retailer, are they able to communicate well about how their shipping is going? And if anything is not in alignment with what their original brand promise was, are they able to articulate that in a way that customers want to hear it and make sense of it? We're helping the brands understand how people are searching for COVID content across channels. We're helping brands understand how their employees want to work from home, and how their home offices need to be optimized for remote work. So yet another experience. So we put all of this together in a qualitative way to help understand the journey of the customer across all the touch points, and make sense of it so that you can be delivering the right experience at the right place.
Great. So that's actually a good segue in terms of if we talk about more about qualitative data. So Amy, if you could elaborate on that. Most people, as you think about data and analytics, it's mathematical and statistical. But what AnswerLab has been particularly successful at is capturing qualitative data from consumers and other constituents. So could you talk about that a bit more, and how you've been able to provide marketers and other decision makers with qualitative data?
Sure. So we typically engage with companies in a number of different ways. One is that a client may be embarking on a very large initiative to redesign an entire experience. Let's say the entire bill payment platform experience is going to change over the course of the year. Or a client may be launching an entire new experience that they never had before. And what we'll do is partner with them through that process and build the insights into each stage of the process. What do we build? Are we building the right thing? Now we've got a couple of concepts and ideas. Is this the right concept and the right value proposition? And now we're into the iterative design process. And are we building this in the way that people want to see it? And is it meeting their experience goals, right? Before it goes live, and then benchmarking it over time. That's one way. Another way is that we have clients who are constantly doing work, constantly making updates to their experiences. So you can think Google and Facebook. And we will embed a team that works with their product teams to bring the qualitative insights into every single decision they're trying to make. And so it's just ongoing research that's happening all the time. I think if you think about the traditional market research world, there's very kind of episodic, we have this thing, let's go get this research study and let's get the answers 6 months later. Ours is very iterative, short, quick, fast, giving people the insight they need to make the decision to move to the next stage in the design process. So it's critical because you can't make a good design decision if you don't know what the consumer thinks of the experience or how they're going through it.
Okay, that's great. So if we could talk for a moment about identity resolution, which I think, Alex, you had begun to touch upon. Given that customers have, or individuals have, so many different devices and are in so many different touch points, how is it that marketers can accomplish identity resolution and resolve that there are consumer profiles and do that in an increasingly complex world of multiple devices and so many different touch points? Would anybody want to begin with that?
Sure. Happy to jump in, and Alex, feel free to jump in as well, or Amy. I think, look, like attribution, the technology exists to do a lot of these things. The question is, are there limitations by the major companies in the space? And are there limitations around things like privacy? From an identity resolution perspective, you can attach data in a so-called anonymous way to an anonymous profile and get a pretty good sense of what somebody's doing, what they're buying, where they're going. And the more data you attach sometimes, the better idea you can get of who somebody is to some degree. I think from a marketer, that sounds like a great thing. And wow, if we could, the more that we can know, the better we have an opportunity to serve someone. I think from a consumer, that's not always the best thing. And what I've seen in a lot of these data sets is that technology is imperfect and we'll get it wrong. And when you get it wrong and it's something personal, like we've identified someone and we believe that they're a man and they're actually a woman, or we believe they're a woman and they're a man, or we think they're married and they're not, or vice versa, you end up making different decisions as a marketer about how you're speaking to that person or with that person. And if we get it wrong, we end up in a bad place. I think identity resolution is important, but I really think that we need to ask better questions about the permission. I know for a fact that a lot of credit card companies sell their data. So you transact and they sell your data, and it can be connected to a so-called anonymous online profile, and you can be targeted on the major platforms based on what you bought. So if you go to McDonald's and you swipe a certain credit card, if they have a deal to sell that data, which many of them do, you can then be targeted for going to McDonald's, and then you can get geofenced based on your location and on and on. Again, I think there's a trade imbalance with what consumers understand in terms of what information is being given and how it's being used. So some of this stuff does exist, and there's real challenges with getting it to work well. But I don't think we can forget about what data we're using and how we're using it, because I think this is going to come back to bite people. Alex made a great point about CCPA and GDPR, and that you have to have, there are regulations now, and you need a company to help you deal with that. I would assert that the vast majority of companies out there are not living up to their requirements or the requirements under GDPR or CCPA, which say you have to have consent and you have to have choice. And they specifically say what you cannot do is simply put up an OK box and just essentially force everyone to click OK. Now visit any site in the world, and what do you see? For the most part, an OK box. And they believe that they've roughly checked the box on this problem. So I think identity resolution is very much so related to privacy.
Yeah. Okay, great. What will, Alex, you want to add something?
I just want to kind of, so yes to everything, and just to drive home the point that, identity resolution is really, again, your first party data strategy, right? So organizations really have to figure out how they're going to create experiences that are optimized around the customer's needs and that deliver value in exchange for information. And that exchange of information must also address that you're, building a device graph as well as building the ID graph. I mean, you got to do it. And absent that, you're going to be outsourcing that to third parties. And there are a large number of them out there. Of course, Google and Facebook have great device graphs, and Merkle and Axiom have great device graphs and ID graphs as well. So I think that what companies are going to have to come around to the realization is that they'll know, if they get it right, they'll be able to identify, logged in state is an easy one, or an app, something like that. So you're going to have to create the whole value equation around the logged in state, but they'll be able to identify the people that they know about. The challenge, of course, is the ones that they don't know will look like the ones that they do know. And that's why you really need to be really good on your identity resolution, to really have a full understanding of those people before you then start to try and map that out against third-party data sets.
Yeah. Okay, great. So what we're going to take a moment now, and we're going to introduce a slide, and that will, as we talk about the strategic M&A opportunities in data analytics, as you can see here, there's been a lot of activity, and this is, maps out over the last year or so, so from about 2019 onwards. Some of the most notable transactions, as you can see here, are the Salesforce acquisition of Tableau, of course, for over $15 billion, which really emphasizes the importance of data visualization. And then, Google, acquiring Looker for big data analytics, and particularly cloud data analytics and visualization for about little over $2.5 billion. And then on the service side, Publicis' acquisition of Epsilon for data marketing services. And many of you will also recognize that Interpublic had also bought Axiom for it was a multi-billion-dollar deal as well in the data marketing services area. Some of these others that you might note is the acquisition of Localytics, which demonstrates mobile app personalization analytics, and then other location analytics like Foursquare and Place, of course, which is about a $150 million deal. So certainly there's been a lot of activity here on the M&A front as the platforms are building out their data visualization, the mobile and personalization analytics, the local intelligence analytics. Any comments that anybody has here? And if not, we can shift on to the next topic.
Only follow the money.
Yeah, so certainly, and obviously, in a new, market and new dynamics, it'll be really interesting to see how this, how the new analytics start to shape up. Many of us now working remotely, so to some extent, some of the mobile analytics, at least at the moment, are maybe less relevant. But as we're all going to, come out of our work at home environment, then that mobile analytics component of it will, I think, become increasingly important as we're traveling and doing other things. So we'll turn our attention to one last topic, and which is near and dear to many of your attention and hearts with regards to the pivot that you've. So there's been such great transformation, and the pandemic has created an entirely different market and different dynamics. So if it would be really interesting to hear how you've adjusted or pivoted your business, and any advice you may have for the marketing and advertising technology and agency leaders out there on how to adopt to this new world. Amy, perhaps you want to begin with that one?
Sure, I'd be delighted to. So as everyone on this call heard me talk, a lot of our work is one-on-one. So you might be wondering, how on earth are they doing one-on-one research given what's going on with COVID? So at the beginning of March, when we saw that this was coming, I asked the company to basically shut down everything we're doing in person and shift it well before the shelter in place orders. I really wanted to preserve the safety and the health of all of our employees and all of our clients and all of our participants. And so what we did was we looked across our business and said, wow, 75% of it is going to be in person over the next few months, and 25% of it is remote. So I started a campaign with the team, and I said, let's call it stay safe and save the 75%. And I asked them to convert every single in-person project that we had to be a remote one as fast as they could. And they did that. They converted 90 projects from in-person to remote in 5 business days. I couldn't believe it. They kept them all on the original schedule. They kept all of the March and April revenue on track while still giving the clients really the business insights they needed when they wanted it. So now we've converted all of our complex methodologies like participatory design, ethnography, we've converted all of it to being remote. We've shifted our business strategy, which was a lab. Largely, we had a lab rental business on top of our research, and we have labs in the Empire State Building and on Market Street in San Francisco. We've shifted that to being software reselling. And so we've taken a lot of focus on what's that backroom experience that clients would be having, normally. How do we recreate that online? And we've done it. And we just keep innovating on all of our approaches every single month. And we really don't feel comfortable asking any of our clients or our participants or our researchers to go back in person to do research until there are vaccines or treatments to help take care of COVID, because we can do this remotely and still grow the business. So I guess my advice is to move fast. I was just so shocked at how quickly our teams mobilized and how that kept the revenue on track. And if you have any inkling that you need to make a change, innovating and switching as fast as you can and being as bold as possible is what's really going to save the business at this time, I think.
That's great. And we've seen firsthand the tremendous success that you've had. I think some of it was that you also anticipated and were prepared for different changes in terms of economic climate, and you had other plans in place, but you did certainly move particularly well and agile in such a short time, and it's great to see the success there. Anyone else want to comment on that? And if not, we can move to some of the Q&A that we have here as well.
Yeah, I'll do a very quick comment, which is that I'm no longer running MOAT, but I'll talk about a business that I am still an owner of, or part owner of, which is called the Surf Lodge out in Montauk. And the Surf Lodge is, for those of you who don't know, a hotel slash motel slash restaurant slash bar, but is all about physical gathering. I mean, if Surf Lodge exists so that people can get together physically and be close together physically, that presents a pretty big problem at the time of this pandemic. So I think the thought process that we all went through was, first and foremost, I think like everyone, make sure that our team is okay, the individual people, employees, make sure that everyone continues to get paid, make sure that they're safe, make sure that people know that they should stay home, et cetera, and do what's best for themselves and their family. Second of all, we asked the question, what can we do to help our community? And so we ended up raising over $10,000 for a local food pantry in Montauk to start delivering meals, and they were already delivering food and meals to folks that were in need. And so we helped leverage our audience online to do that. Third thing we said, the opening of the summer, the traditional opening of the summer is this weekend. That's a huge weekend for Surf Lodge normally, and is not going to be in person at all now. So what can we do? And we brainstormed, and our founder, Jonah, came up with this idea of a virtual concert. So she got some pretty amazing folks like Rufus Du Sol and Snoop Dogg and others to come together to put on a virtual Memorial Day weekend Surf Lodge show this Sunday. So, we'll see how it goes. We'll see if it works. We'll see if it doesn't work. But I think that the lesson that we took away was, sort of go back to the basics, make sure everybody's okay, ask what you can do to help. And then how do you iterate and how do you build something that maybe could work even with whatever is going on. And that's hard, particularly for a business that was 100% in person as that business is and was.
Yeah, it's great. It's a great example. Okay, so with that, we'll turn our attention to some questions that we have here from our audience. So I'll begin. Henry Rowe from Theorem, who's the CSO there, asks, will any of the ID consortiums created due to the demise of the third-party cookie challenge the major digital platforms? Will any of the ID consortiums challenge the major digital platforms?
I think I can handle that. I'll take a stab at that and say it's a great question. And I would say I think they're going to coexist. So will they challenge? I think in a certain way they will. But if you take a look at the major consortiums that are out there, they not only have identity, they also have assets, right? They have the channels and the media. So there's those two sides. I need to be able to identify, then I need to be able to activate and then reach, right? So the ID consortiums are producing, they're evolving in a rapid way. They're creating their data clean rooms where you can merge your data with theirs and then figure out those unique audiences and then activate those against different channels and different addressable markets. I think we're going to see the rise of consortiums around addressable markets, and we're already seeing that, right? Where publisher addressable marketplaces are coming together as a counterweight to the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world. So I think the short answer to the question is yes, but it's way early to bet against Facebook or Google or any of those other ones right now.
Yeah, no kidding. So here's a question. I'll actually answer briefly, and then we'll get to a third one. So William Durant of Exforis, the president, asks, are acquisition targets that remain strong seeing premium pricing, or are acquirers only looking for discounts now? So I would say from what we've seen in terms of M&A transactions, particularly in the data analytics space, so there continues to be universal demand and high demand for data analytics across all different platforms and different means. What we've seen in some cases is that there was some blip in particularly March and April during when the crisis hit, that there was kind of a shock, but many of the companies that we're talking to, particularly in the digital space, if not the data analytics space, have rebounded quite well or are starting to rebound quite well. The prices themselves and the transaction value, I would say that have really not been very much impacted. Some of the buyers took somewhat of a pause over that period, and I would say they're starting to regroup. And if anything, I would say the market really hasn't changed. If anything, it's the companies themselves that had some blips or were kind of caught off guard, understandably. But for the most part, I'd say the market interest in the values, continue to remain the same. And we had Sir Martin Sorrell speak, a few weeks ago, and he had the same thing to say, that unfortunately as a buyer, that the market prices haven't come down, particularly in the data analytics space and the digital marketing, services and technology area. So with that, there's one last question we'll take here from Ken Robbins, who's the CEO of ResponseMind Interactive. And he has an interesting question. Can an agency improve value by assembling off-the-shelf data partners and platforms instead of building proprietary data? Anyone want to answer that? Alex, you want to answer that? 'Cause you probably-
I think I understand the question to say, can I basically buy my first party data or sorry, can I buy data about people to then, and the short answer to that is I think yes. But I'm not sure whether that's a sustainable approach in the long term. I guess the way I look at it is in a world where everything has gone digital, the importance of your knowledge about your customers and managing that as a core business asset is only going to grow. And I would be cautious about outsourcing that altogether. It's kind of like outsourcing your financials. At a certain point in time, you shouldn't do that. You should have that within the organization. I'm not sure that answered, but hopefully.
Okay, so we're at the top of the hour at 2 o'clock here Eastern. First, I want to thank very much our distinguished panelists for joining us here. So thanks, Jonah, Amy, and Alex. The insight has been really helpful, and your perspectives has been extraordinary. So we very much appreciate that. We of course appreciate the audience for joining us here, and hope that this has been helpful. And if you have any questions for any of the panelists or for us directly here at Madison Alley, then we'd be glad to respond as well. So thanks very much for joining us, and hope everyone stays safe and well. And take care.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, Jonah. Thank you, Michael.
Cheers.
Okay, cheers.